Are the very strange and hard to pronounce words hindering you from picking up a classical book? Listen, it's not that hard, and this video is meant to be a guide on how to go about reading classical literature and advice on what to read. I overcame my dull fears of reading literature by simply going after what I wanted to read. Earlier this year, I purely read fantasy. For the first time actually, I picked up a Star Wars book, then I picked up J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. And that's when it clicked for me. You see, The Hobbit was released on September 21st, 1937, but I wasn't intimidated by its strange density of complexity with its words, but rather I embraced it because I loved the high fantasy I was reading. When reading The Hobbit, I didn't even know it was recorded across the world as classical literature. Rather, I just ordered a copy from Amazon and was amazed at what I was reading. I lay down in my bed and read the story of Bilbo Baggins with the ring he used to get out of every single terrible problem he had to go through. The harder words in this novel weren't even that big of a challenge to me because, as funny as this may sound, I thought it was a part of how the fantasy was written in this novel. I enjoyed reading The Hobbit nevertheless because it had been a while since I read anything. The last thing I actually read before this was Night by Elie Wiesel. The Hobbit opened my eyes to the world of possibilities of what I can read now. I didn't want to pick up any classical literature at first because I thought it was boring since it was written hundreds or if not thousands of years ago depending on the book. And I thought to myself, those old authors wouldn't understand these real world issues, and what they're writing about is solely only good to the people of their own time to read, and it isn't that prevalent now. And I was very wrong about that. To simplify all that I just said, let's look at George Orwell's Animal Farm. He writes about animals on this farm and ends up creating a hierarchy system where animals are in power and do terrible things when they are in power. Behind the scenes, they ruin pretty much everybody else's lives and acts like everything is okay. I personally didn't know about that little blurb at first and would have avoided Animal Farm because I thought George Orwell or any other classic author, their ideas would not blend with the present time and their work is only famous because it resonated with the people from their own generation. Little do I know I was completely wrong. Classical literature is almost more prevalent than ever before and needs to be read the more time passes on, because the value just keeps on growing with every one of these old novels. My favorite classical literature is 1984 by George Orwell, and I read that book in less than a week because of how much I loved it. I was amazed at how George Orwell came up with the idea of such a story where the government controls everything and everyone, and the people do not bat an eye. Rather, they follow what the government does without question. And guys, this novel was written in 1948. It doesn't seem that crazy, right? These classical literature books possess great knowledge from us to learn from in the present day, and 1984 is one of the best examples I can use. This classic takes place in a dystopian future where three government powers are at war with each other, and our main protagonist, Winston Smith, is a normal human in a society that has mass surveillance in use and uses it to extreme manners. I remember when reading that Winston pointed out multiple times that the government uses mass surveillances in people's washrooms and showers 24/7. No privacy at all, and the government does this in order for the safety of their own society and to eliminate anyone who they think are conspiring or spies amongst them. I'm not saying that this is happening now, but we can learn from this idea of the past. That is exactly why classical literature exists, for us, the readers in present time, to learn from. 1984 taught me just how corrupt a government can get, and all they have to do is say, hey, I'm trying to protect society, so we have to tighten up our measures on people so we can destroy the illegal things in our country and rid them out for good. What made this book even more appealing to me was just how long ago the novel was made. And if someone were to tell me that this book was made in 1948, I would have almost never picked it up, because I always had this connotation that old books would not work in the present day and are overly complex for no reason, but that is simply not true. By 1984 being released in 1948 and talks about a world where some of the things in the books are now being true in real time adds immense value to the book, and that type of value continues to grow the older the classical literature gets. And also, this is going to sound very odd depending on how you take it, but reading a book made decades or centuries ago is far different from reading a book published 20 or 5 years ago, and there's a big difference. It's not to say that books made hundreds of years ago are automatically better than the newer books. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, newer books may be better than literature back then, but a few classic literatures that are published, such as Animal Farm, The Picture of Dorian Gray, Wuthering Heights, The Odyssey, and The Iliad, which I'm currently reading right now by the time of recording this video, are so elevated as time goes on. Another reason I started to read classics is that I started to read what I loved, and through that, I like seeing how authors' views on the world back then were and how the novels are very different compared to how we write books these days. These classical novels are written in a whole different time period. Orwell wrote after World War II, where the earth was basically falling apart and millions were dying. And the Bronte sisters wrote their books when women were strongly disliked if they wrote stories. All of these make it so interesting when reading the works of these authors because it's as if they lived in a completely different world. Therefore, their novels are a strong influence on that, which makes their novel far more interesting as time goes on. It feels as if you're reading a novel from a person from a completely different world because they genuinely lived in a very different time and a very different lifestyle compared to us in the present, which moves their novels greatly. Now, moving on to my next point on why you hate classics, but why you should read them nevertheless, is because many of you probably despise classics because you were forced to read them in school. And I just want to say it's completely valid on not to pick up something naturally because you were forced into it. But at the same time, when I was also in high school, the English curriculum made us read books as well, classics, because they deemed it more knowledgeable for kids to learn from. And there wasn't anything wrong with that part. It was just the forcing part. I was forced to read Animal Farm in my first year because it talked about authoritarian power, in which I had to do an essay on. I hated reading, and this made my hatred grow even more, but at a slower rate. And I say a slower rate because despite me hating reading, I actually loved Animal Farm. I was actually confused on how this masterpiece was written so long ago. Animal Farm was a short read, and my teacher gave us 2 weeks to read it, and I binged it in 5 days. Of course, I had to tell my friends that I disliked it, because I actually told them earlier that I did hate books, so that switch up would be pretty confusing. But when I love a book that I'm reading, I read it constantly, and I did that with Animal Farm. And some of you might be watching this video and have the same experience that I had, which is okay. And I totally understand where you're coming from because just like you, I also had the same experience, but with a different classic, and I'm talking about Macbeth. I dislike Macbeth so much. We pretty much read a crappy version of Macbeth with very complex language, and my teacher would have to stop us every couple of sentences to make sure we understood what we were reading, and it was just a very terrible experience. And from that moment, I kind of fell out of the love I had for reading classical literature. I mean, I wasn't really too deep into reading classics. Other than those two, I hadn't read any classics at all, but Macbeth absolutely destroyed any of my chances of picking up a classic book again in the future because of how complex I thought it was, how boring I thought it was at that time, and because I had to write an essay on a book that I strongly disliked. Now, this brings me to my next point, and it's that don't let these terrible trauma moments in school or you are continuing to have in school, if you still are in school reading these classics, to ruin classical books for you. We all have bad experiences with books, and that's okay. Reading a synopsis for a classic or even hearing about it from other people and seeing if you like it can really help you try to select and choose a classic novel that you like. So don't outright shun away classics, that's not the point. It's to find something that you really want to sink your teeth in. And in school, it's very rare to choose your classic novel that you want to study for, so I would suggest that in your own free time when trying to pick up classics, find something that you really like. An example of this right now is that I'm reading the Iliad, and soon after I finish reading the Iliad, I will read the Odyssey because that's the type of classics that I love to read. And no, I'm not forcing myself to read it like how school makes us. Reading is what I genuinely love, and it makes a whole lot of a difference if you're actually reading a book you like. With the Iliad, I love the idea about how the Greeks fight to rule over one another with different warriors and gods playing a role in this book. I first heard about this book from others saying it was good and people kept on recommending it for me, and luckily it caught my eyes. The Iliad is based on poems by Homer and is composed with around 24 and it makes for the book. I'm halfway done the book and I can tell you all just how amazing it is. I love how every page is detailed. When Homer talks about people in the novel, he mentions where they're from, who their father is, if they're lowborn or highborn, and how much wealth they have and how strong they are. I love these little details as they add depth to every single warrior that is killed or doing the killing. And I will continue reading this classic because I love where the story is going and want to know how each and every warrior's journey will end. I need to know what will happen to Hector, Achilles, Ajax, Paris, and so many more. You can just tell by what I'm saying of how much I love this book, and that is important when reading literature. If you don't love it, you will burn out and you will lose your love for classics, unfortunately. So try and find a classic that you enjoy. There are hundreds upon hundreds out there. And I'm not saying that to overwhelm you, but to tell you, the reader, that you have so many options to choose from and the choices are endless. If you like romance, try Wuthering Heights. If you like good versus bad, try Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. And if you like something with a lot of depth, you should check out Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I have not read Crime and Punishment, but do not worry. As soon as I finish my Greek books, I will for sure read it. I have the physical copy, so I will do that in no time. Now moving on, you may hate classical literature because you simply have no idea what they're talking about. You know how earlier in the video I said it's a trip to the past, like a whole different world? That can be a con as much as it can be a pro. Present-day readers may have a hard time connecting with older books and feeling that way, and it's completely valid, and I felt that way when reading The Picture of Dorian Gray at some points. Because of what the author had been referring to at some points, only the people in his time would understand. At least that's what I thought. It's not to say that I couldn't search it up, the historical and philosophical references, but when you're reading a book, you don't really think to do that right away. At least that's how it was for me. So at times, it did make for a difficult read. However, with that being said, it was a perfect opportunity to gain knowledge while reading. Don't be afraid or hesitate to search up words or meanings that you don't understand if they don't already have footnotes. It's okay to not know everything. And we humans are constantly learning, and what better way to learn by reading? Classical literature is where I find I'm learning the most in, at least when it comes to morals, identity, and societal questions. I found this to be true when reading The Picture of Dorian Gray for the first time. I learned so much on what it means to hold on to things even though it's unhealthy, and learned how such heavy manipulations can hurt and damage a soul beyond repair. Those examples of what Oscar Wilde covers in this novel made me read the book so fast because of how much I loved it. I loved the ideas being portrayed in this novel because it was something different, and it almost felt like it was pointed towards the youth of England at that time, and I liked that it was directed towards that demographic, and it didn't make me lose my connection for the book. Rather, it was relatable in the sense that I don't think no one wants to lose their youth and make it disappear. But to read about a young gentleman trying to do anything in his power in order to not lose his youth is pretty interesting to read. The morals surrounding that book heavily made me fall in love with classics, and that allowed me to pick up even more classics that I love to read and do not regret picking up. Now, it's time to give the ultimate guide and advice to stay on track to read those classics, gain the knowledge, and admire the beauty in them. Before, I stated all the reasons why you don't read classics and why I relate to that, because I used to be the same, and I gave you different strategies on how to go about it to finally face your fears. But now I do have some guidelines. I would first say watch a small YouTube video about the novel you're about to start or are interested in, or read a summary. That's if you don't mind a little bit of spoilers. If not, that's fine. There are plenty of spoiler-free videos on YouTube to watch. I first did this with Animal Farm and Macbeth at school because it's as if I needed to hear the same information being spoken out of a new mouth to really grasp the idea of what was really going on in the book. This helped me grasp the concepts in this book, which I found were slightly more complex than I was used to when reading other novels. Next is pick your poison. Since almost all classics are free domains, this makes it exceptionally easy to skim through and see what you like. Classic novels are all mostly free and all over the internet, and this is completely legal because after the author passes away, it takes around 70 years after their passing that their books become free domains, which means almost all classics are online and easy to find, which is definitely a positive. But I personally love reading physical books because I love the feeling when they're in my hand, and I love the texture that comes with it. I do not like reading on my phone or my computer because I already spend too much time on those. I spend so much time writing away on my new novel I'm creating. Hint hint, I just finished the manuscript and it will be coming out soon. It's either I'm doing that or editing a new video for my YouTube channel. Also, you know how I just talked about how I liked reading physical books? That also can be a pro for classics, how they simply look. Don't you want a beautiful penguin black classic on your bookshelf, or that turtle blue modern classic on your bookshelf? I mean, it looks amazing and it's worth it for just that look on your bookshelf. Having all these experiences lessen the intimidation when picking up a classic to read for pleasure and not for school. The second advice I would give is this mini classical guide to go slow and annotate. Do not try to speed run through classics just to say that you read a classic novel even though you were just skimming through the pages. Allow yourself to understand the material and consume it. Annotations also can help you. I also place annotations for plots, quotes, and themes in a classic book because I feel like that helps me understand the book even more, and for classics, that's a plus. The process of reading classics is meant to be slow, so break up the chapters over days and give yourself some time to understand what you're reading and comprehend it. Don't just read classics to skim through it. And don't be afraid to go search up online what certain references or words mean, because once you finish a chapter, you can just easily go back and search it up. This maybe feel like a small step that you're doing and you can do it a couple times, but they truly do help when understanding classics. So now, what can you take away from this video? Well, you should take away that you only can read a classic if you genuinely find yourself interested in it and see yourself completing it. Otherwise, you're just going to be dreadfully reading a classic just to say, oh yeah, I read that classic. Or you just read it because everyone else was reading it at that time. Do not do that. Read the classics that you find interesting and are willing to read. And that is where you will read about the timeless lessons in those novels. I find that themes in classics are interesting to read because it shows you how morals and society was very different and how it influenced the work back then. And this allows you to open your eyes to gain new insights. And lastly, don't feel pressure to finish dozens upon dozens of classics in 1 year. Slow down, go at your own pace, and everything else will flow naturally. And this is your sign. This whole video is your sign to pick up a classic and to start reading it. To those that made it that far into this video, I want to thank you, and if you liked it that much, please consider hitting the subscribe button. I would be very grateful and it would mean a lot. For those who are keeping up with me and my journey on publishing my own novel, I'm finished the manuscript for the book titled A Coward Maniac. and that book will be available by middle to end of August, depending on how fast I'm editing, so watch out for that. If you want any updates and you want to be there for when I do make a video about my novel, then please consider hitting the subscribe button and you'll be updated. Thank you all, and bye for now.